Welcome. This is National Kitchen and Bath Association, and you're here for using lighting to create the perfect environment with Sam Woodward, who's the customer education leader with Lutron, and with Ed Wenck, who's the content director of CEDIA. Gentlemen, if you're ready, let's get started, please.
Deb, thanks so much. My name is Ed Wenck. As Deb mentioned, I'm the content director for CEDIA. CEDIA.net, the place to go to find out more about our organization. And we're going to talk about lighting today with a gentleman who is an absolute expert in the field. Sam Woodward is currently the customer education leader, Europe and Africa at Lutron Electronics. His career includes stints as a pyrotechnics expert for everything from rock concerts to Hollywood movies. If you ever get the chance to chat with him about his work with Ridley Scott on Gladiator and some other films, please do. It will make for a very entertaining evening. Long story short, Sam knows a lot about light. He has contributed to numerous CEDIA podcasts, which you can also find at cedia.net. And since I host them, I'm biased, but they're very entertaining. He's written white papers for us. He's handled training events. In fact, he is the CEDIA 2018 CEDIA Training Volunteer of the Year. He is working on standards and practices that will be woven into CEDIA courseware, and you are all in for quite a treat over the course of the next hour as Sam tells you all about lighting in the home. Sam Woodward, take it away, my friend.
Ed, thank you. What a marvelous introduction. It's great to be with you all. Thank you very much. And as Ed said, today we're going to be looking at understanding how controlled lighting can transform a space. And to begin that journey, I'd like you to think of a room at the heart of the home. And unsurprisingly, as this is the NKBA webinar, we're going to be thinking about the kitchen dining room. And the thought that I want to put in your minds is to think of all of the different activities that happen in that space. Now, I'm sure there are many, many different things that you're thinking of right now. Perhaps you're thinking of that fun and boisterous, exciting family meal together. Maybe you clear off the kitchen table and little Freddie there is going to do his homework on it. Or, of course, it's February the 15th today. Maybe yesterday evening you had a nice, warm, cozy, romantic meal for two at home. And how did that feel? The key to how it feels is choosing the right light for each task, for each mood, for everything that we want to do in that space. And I hope you'd agree that those heart rooms in the home can be completely transformed, and they're very, very multifunctional. And the key to making them truly multifunctional is realizing that there's a whole world between on and off. And so often we think about lighting, and we think about lighting in a room as simply being the light switch that turns the lights on and that turns the lights off. But there's a whole world in between, and in fact there are many dimensions in between, which we're going to look at this afternoon. And the analogy that I like to give is this. We're quite used to choosing different beverages according to what we're doing at a particular time of day. So maybe when you woke up this morning, you felt you needed to get invigorated by a nice cup of coffee. Now, I'm an Englishman. Perhaps in the middle of the day, I might enjoy a cup of tea. And I can tell you, before I go to bed this evening, I'm certainly going to be enjoying a nice mug of warm hot chocolate to get me in the right mood for dozing off this evening. So we're quite used to thinking about consuming different things. We're quite used to thinking about transforming what we ingest in terms of drink, in terms of many different things, according to the task, according to the mood. And the thought I want to put in your mind is this. It's exactly the same with light. We can transform the way we use a room, transform the usefulness of a space with light. In order to do that, we need to think about all the different sources of light. And so think about a kitchen, think about a kitchen dining room. There'll be many different types of light. There might be, for example, some downlights. There might be some lights underneath the counters. There might be some lights surrounding the pedestals and around the island. You might be fortunate enough to have a glorious chandelier hanging above your table. You might have some pendant lighting. There could be all kinds of different lighting in there. And we can broadly divide those lights into ambient lighting, lighting for lighting the space, task lighting, So lighting for particular things that we're doing. So for example, in my kitchen, I've got some task lighting above the sink so that I can see when I'm washing up. I've got some more task lighting just next to the stove so that I can see when I'm preparing vegetables for cooking. And you might also have some accent lighting. Perhaps there are interesting architectural features. Perhaps there are sconces that you wish to light up. Perhaps you've got some artwork. There could be some accent lighting in there. And broadly speaking, all of the light fixtures will be doing a job, and those jobs will be falling into one of these three categories of lighting. We've got a couple of comments coming up here saying that they can't hear or see. I'm hoping that this is coming through okay. Thinking about those different types of lighting that we have, we divide up the room into we divide up the uses of the room into what we call lighting scenes. And the best analogy I can think of is that lighting scenes are a bit like cooking different recipes, except we use the lights as the ingredients. And then for each scene that we create, each zone of lighting will have a different brightness level, kind of like weighing each different ingredient. Now, I've used the word there, zone. What is a lighting zone? Well, a lighting zone is simply a circuit of one or more independently controllable light fittings. So you could think of the light above the island as being one zone. You might have the downlights divided into several zones that are independently controllable, but each zone can have its brightness level set. And as I said, the scenes that you create from them are like cooking different recipes, and you're mixing together those different lighting zones in different proportions to create the overall scene that you want to create. Does that make sense, Ed?
Is there a percentage of one versus another, or is it entirely dependent upon the space?
It's entirely dependent upon the space. It's dependent upon the lux output, or in the States quite often you use foot candles, but the yes, lumen output of that light, and different light sources will have different brightnesses. So there wouldn't be sort of fixed proportions that you would always choose for any given kitchen. It would very much depend not only on the light sources, but also on what they're shining onto. So different coloured surfaces, different, I'll use the posh word, coefficients of reflectivity. You might have, I have in my kitchen, I have a nice marble worktop, but you might have other materials that are in there. And so the coefficient of reflectivity of the surfaces, the colours, will all determine what's going to be the optimum brightness for the lights.
And I'd imagine that with the new form factors we have with LED lights, that some of these lights can even do double duty in some instances, correct? Go from task to accent, perhaps.
Absolutely. We have various types of light fixture that can do both uplighting and downlighting, and they may or may not be independently controllable for doing different jobs. So you'll have all kinds of different light fixtures in different places doing different jobs. And that's very important to realize, that there are fixtures in different locations. And so we want to really move our thought process along from just thinking about the room being on or off to being that subtle mixture of each different zone, each different type of fixture doing its different job for the different things that we're using the room for at different times of day. The key, though, is we want to make it really easy to use. If we're going to transform the room, if we want the room to be both dynamic and adaptable, and I've got to say, above all, fun to be in, then we need to make it straightforward to do that. We don't want it to be a hassle to set the lighting to perform each of these tasks. We want to make it really straightforward. Remember, we're lighting spaces for people, and people have complicated lives. We want to make this thing not an added complication in their lives. We want to make it very simple. And here's where a lot of people fall down. A lot of people assume that you need a separate light switch for every independent zone of lighting. And I have a peculiar hobby, and my wife joins me in this now. And my hobby is that I take photographs of bad light switches. And here's an example. I'll give you some more from my collection later on. But there is no need for this to happen. Hopefully you're all seeing on the screen there a column of light switches, one for each zone of lighting in a space. I would not want to have to switch the lights off at the end of the day in that room. It would take me forever to be switching all of those.
We at CEDIA call this particular monstrosity wall acne. And that is a really egregious example of it you've got there, Mr. Woodward.
Absolutely. And there is really no need for that to happen. We need to change the paradigm in which we're thinking. We need to have a paradigm shift away from thinking of a one-to-one relationship from light switch to light source, and instead think about buttons that you can press for a task. And here's a really simple example. This little keypad, it's about the size of my finger, has got a button for bright lighting, perhaps that's when I'm cleaning the kitchen. It's got a button for cooking, that's probably going to be focused on task lighting and nice bright lights on the countertops. I've got a button for eating, it's going to be nice and subdued, and the hard work is done then. I want to have some fun and relax. And of course we mustn't forget a button to turn the lights off at the end of the day. So a very simple task-based keypad can do that. And this particular keypad here is engraved so you can see what it's for. And if we were to look at what the lighting might be doing, and this is entirely configurable and adjustable, but if we were to look at what the lighting might be doing, then we could come up with levels like this. So, the bright button might be, let's say I've got 3 lights here, some ceiling lights, some island lights, and a pendant. It might be all of those on full whack at 100%. For cooking, I might dim my pendant, but I still want my island light to be on 100%. But then when I'm dining, let's take it down. Let's chill. Let's go down to a much lower percentage on each of those. And of course, the off button is to turn them off. But there's one other thing that I put on this screen here, and that's over on the right-hand side. You can see there's a column for the blinds. That's right. We need to think about all of the places that light comes from. And we're not just talking about artificial light, but we're talking about natural light as well. The sun, which is just starting to set over here in England, the sun is the biggest source of light there is. Half an hour ago, I was outside and there were maybe 30,000 lux in terms of the level from the sun. Indoors, typically you'd be looking at about 500 lux or so. So there's a massive amount of light from the sun, and there's a lot of different reasons why we might want to harvest that light, why we might want to make use of that light. Not least of which is it's wonderfully good for us. It's excellent to see. And this is all part of a topic which is gaining a lot of interest. It's very much the topic du jour in the world of lighting at the moment, which is human-centric lighting. And part of human-centric lighting is all about establishing a connection to the outside world. So if we can think about the lighting in our rooms, both as dynamic but also connected to a very big and important and natural dynamic light source in the sun, then we're doing a lot of good. And establishing a connection to the outside world is not only good from the perspective of light, but if we can give people views, that will help improve their mood. It will help people focus better. It's been shown to improve all kinds of things. This human-centric element is very good. It also allows us to give people a more distant focal point. When we're indoors, we're normally looking at something close to us. If we can look at something that's some distance away, it's going to help us relieve eye strain. So all of that is very good. Now I can see there's a question come up about technical requirements. We're going to talk about cabling in just a moment. So excellent question. Thank you very much. I'm going to talk about that. But as you've specifically asked, in terms of that 4-scene switch, that particular one I showed you is wireless, so no cabling required. We'll come back to that. This connection to the outside world has as I said, become a topic of great importance in the lighting world. And I'm going to give you another posh word here, which is biophilic design. The idea that designing into our schemes those outside views of nature are very good for us. But once again, the key thing that we need to bear in mind is how do we make it easy to use? Anything that's difficult to use, anything that's inconvenient, anything that means reaching across a worktop, for example, to tug a curtain, is probably not going to get used as often as we might like. And so a great way to take advantage of our ability to give ourselves a connection to the outside world is with motorized shading. And I've got to say, out of all of the lighting technology, this is one of my favorites because they are so cool to put in. And there's lots and lots of different types of motorized shades. So, for example, one of the most common is the roller shade. Now, you might have seen roller shades installed in some offices and think they're a bit noisy. The good news is they don't have to be. You can have roller shades that are virtually silent as they glide up and down, very elegant, presenting either a sheer fabric or, if you wish, a room darkening fabric, a blackout fabric. They can be great for preventing your room acting like a greenhouse. Is that the same word in the States? Do you say greenhouse over there?
Sure, go for
Excellent.
it. We get the concept, yes.
You get the concept, great. So just want to check my English. So if you're reflecting the sunlight back out again, then your room's not going to get so hot. So roller shades are a great, easy, and as I said, aesthetically pleasing, both visually and audibly, addition to the room.
Yeah, we're talking. I'm sorry, Sam, but we're talking about light and climate here too. It seems to me that you're entering when you mention words like greenhouse and so on and so forth. And these things can be automated as well for different times of day, correct?
Absolutely correct. And not only that, but they can all be combined together. So yeah, when I'm thinking about controlling a space, as a lighting guy, I'm primarily thinking about light in all of its various forms, but things like temperature control and linking into your HVAC system, equally important, very straightforward to do. And yeah, you can integrate with all different elements of the environment. Absolutely. So we've looked at roller shades. Maybe your interior designer has got some other ideas. Roman shades, which lift from the bottom, equally easy to deploy, wonderfully effective. You might have Venetian shades. I like Venetian shades because they're dual motored. They've got two things they can do. They can go up and down, and also the slats can tilt forwards and backwards. So you've got both that open close effect, and whilst not all Venetian shades can tilt at any position, the ones that I'm showing you on the screen here are capable of moving to any position and then tilting. And again, that tilt can be wonderfully silent, but also predefined. So it may be that in one scene, in one button, I have my shades fully open. In another scene, I have them halfway down and slightly tilted. It all depends on the view. And remember, I'm trying to maintain a lovely view to think about my human-centric lighting. You could have drapery, curtains that are moving side to side, again automated, so that they can move at the press of a button. And drapery doesn't have to go just from side to side. Here's an example of some very clever drapery, which, whilst it's pleated, can go vertically as well. So lots of exciting choices there, a whole array, a whole big palette of different things that the interior designer could choose to do. However, wherever we think about something that's so wonderful, we need to also think, are there any drawbacks? If I throw open the curtains, if I automate opening my shades, if I do all of that, are there any issues that surround that? And potentially, yes. We need to be aware that we might want to control for glare. Actually, this is kind of a benefit of automated shading, because we can have the shading close if the light is too bright automatically for us. So making it comfortable in the space is something that we can do. So the sunlight is wonderful. It gives us that connection to the outside world, but at the same time, we might want to control it, and automating our shading is a great way of doing that. After all, the last thing that you want to do is have your lovely dining room start feeling more like an interrogation room because there's glaring light. So sometimes it's appropriate to block out the sunshine, or at least to filter it by moving your shades. And it really doesn't matter what shape your windows are, what configuration they are, how hard they are to reach, how high up above the ground they are. I'm not a very tall person, so windows in that top row would be nigh on impossible for me to reach if they were manual. I'd have to clamber on the sofa. That wouldn't be a good idea. But doing it with automated motorized shading is very good. And you can probably just make out in this picture there's actually two sets of shades in every window here. We've got the rather elegant sheer fabric shades in the front, and there are some room darkening, also known as blackout shades, behind. And it's very common to have pairs of shades so that you can screen the sun a little bit, or so that you can adopt privacy in the room. Those of you that are familiar with the theatrical Pepper's Ghost effect will know that as the brightness level relative inside the room to outside the room changes, what you can see inside the room and what you can see outside the room also changes. You'll see what's on the brighter side, and so you may want to deploy blackout shades as well as sheer shades to enhance privacy within the space. And once again, the key here is making it easy to use. And so for both lighting and shading, we want to be thinking about the controls, lighting controls. And so here's where we're going to start exploring the science bit a little bit. And I'm going to start looking at the anatomy of a lighting control system. Now, I promised you some more horrible photos. I went on holiday a couple of years ago, and in the little holiday cottage that we stayed in, this is what the light switches looked like. Now, the owner of the holiday cottage had clearly tried their best to communicate to the folks that were renting the cottage what each of the switches did, or in the case of the fourth one along, what it doesn't do. But this is ugly. There is no need for this. We don't want this. We certainly don't want this kind of thing. Again, it's ugly, it's slow to use, but I have to say it's surprisingly common. And hold on to your hats a second. Here's an aberration of interior design. Lots of different types of lighting dimmers and switches, and some are in rope edge brass and some are plastic. It's just horrible. There's no need to have that kind of thing. We can absolutely steer clear of that. But all of these, all lighting control systems, follow a kind of basic principle that we're already familiar with. On the left-hand side, I've got a light switch. Now, that happens to be the square European-style light switch, but it's very similar to what you have over there in terms of functionality. Again, does the same thing. And then we've got our light sources, our lamps or our fixtures. And if we want to think about the transition to a more automated and controlled lighting control system, and one where we can do scene setting, if we bear this principle in mind, that we're simply talking about a user interface and a light source, then it translates forward into the way we would do it in a slightly cleverer way. Now, at this point, a lot of journalists often say, well, half a second, isn't the light switch dead? Haven't we replaced light switches with apps and control from our phones or our watches or what have you? And I would say be very careful at that point. Yes, there are some wonderful apps for controlling lighting, but think about every member of the household. Think about your elderly relatives. Think about the young. Think about people who are guests in the home. And as everybody comes into the home, their natural instinct is to reach to that position on the wall where we'd all normally expect to see a light switch, or at least to feel one in the dark. So in answer to the question, is the light switch dead? My response would be, it's not, but it's been joined by some really interesting, exciting and useful companions. The light switch itself has evolved into something rather more spectacular, something that's got rather more functionality, but a method of turning the lights on and off is still absolutely going to be required, mounted on the wall, ideally, because that's where people expect to find it. And part of the art of designing a lighting system and a lighting control system is to annoy the homeowners as little as possible, and to do that with user interfaces that they'll find straightforward to use. Are we making sense so far?
You are, and I think this is a point that we really, really need to stress, that there is a history of intuitive interaction with the wall plate, the switch plate on the wall. And while your average 7-year-old may intuitively know how to swipe the tablet properly to turn the lights on and off, older folks generally struggle with it a little bit. And it's a really, really important backup system to have should, the Wi-Fi fail, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You do want to be able to turn your lights off at some point.
Absolutely, yeah, yeah. In fact, we're going to come back to that thought because Wi-Fi and other such technological reliance is something that we're going to address again later. So yeah, absolutely. Now we can think of any control system, lighting, heating, shading, whatever system we're controlling, really as being as three parts. There's the inputs to it, there's the outputs from it, and often there's some thinking, some processing, some magic that happens in the middle. And our inputs, as I've said, would be something that's now evolved from rather than being an on-off switch to being a keypad that has some buttons that can be pressed that will do different things. But there are also other types of inputs that can happen passively in the background, things that we might not even have to think about. On the screen there, that round little picture that you're seeing there is a motion sensor. Put this in your pantry, put this in your storeroom, put this in the larder, whatever it is that you call it. The device here can either switch lights on automatically when you walk into a space, which is really useful perhaps when you're carrying your shopping, or it can turn lights off when a room is unoccupied. And how many parents at this point are going, yeah, just I can never get the kids to turn the lights off. Some kind of occupancy sensor would be great. So think of all of the different things that can be inputs to a control system. I would divide them up into two categories. There's those things that we intentionally interact with, either things that we're going to touch, keypads, buttons, the modern equivalent of the light switch, or apps on the phone. I'm certainly not discounting apps. Or these days, our voice. And I think I've gone around this room turning off all the Alexas. If I haven't, one of them's going to wake up in a minute. But there are many different voice assistants that we can now use to interact with our environmental controls as well.
And the ease of use when it comes to voice, Sam, is so important. It's a marvelous, marvelous addition to all of your user interfaces, especially if you're cooking and your hands are full of chicken and you need Alexa, hopefully she's off at your place and mine too, to turn up the lights a little bit so you see what you're doing and you don't feel like stepping over to the sink, washing your hands, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Voice control is just a fabulous addition to the interfaces in the kitchen when you're talking about raising everything from lights to the volume of the music.
I completely agree. I have Alexa. I've got one of the show devices in my kitchen. I love it. I love cooking, and so my hands are often covered in whatever ingredients it is. I'm a bit of a messy cook, I have to confess. And yeah, the ability to talk to a system is great. Equally, in other parts of the home, there are times when voice isn't a good user interface. If I wake up in the middle of the night and I've reached that age where I may need to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night, it would be inappropriate for me to start yelling out at Alexa, turn the bathroom lights on, because I'll probably wake my wife up, and that wouldn't be a good thing to do. So the multiplicity of user interfaces is the key, and having the right type of user interface for the right thing. There's a question or comment come up in the list here saying motion sensors become code in many countries. You're absolutely right, particularly in commercial buildings, but residentially, they're a very useful part of the user interface palette that we have available to us. But as well as those things that we would intentionally interact with, I would put motion sensors into the automation interactions category. So presence detection, absence detection, also called vacancy and occupancy sensing, or there's many different words for them. They're a very useful item to put in there. as is time control. Yeah, I wake up every day at the same time. I find it useful for my bathroom light to come on automatically. In fact, not only does my bathroom light come automatically first thing in the morning, but also the sound, the radio station that I like to listen to in the morning plays automatically as well. Automated time control just makes the home a more comfortable and convenient place to be. And there's a third one in the middle of the screen here, geofencing. If we're carrying around our smartphone all the time, it knows where we are. And one of the pleasant things we like to do is to ensure that customers return home, and when they return home, their house isn't dark. So it's a warm, lit, inviting space, and they're not coming into a dark area. And geofencing can do that. You can create a virtual fence, geographical fence around a building, and the lighting control system can automatically detect when you're close to home and can switch the lights on, and also can do the opposite. If you've left home and forgotten to turn the lights off, it can do that for you. So there are many, many different ways of interacting with a system. And that's really what I want to stress, is that it's a multiplicity of user interfaces.
I would like to point out quickly, Sam, that I know we're talking about lighting, but geofencing solutions can be applied to a broad range of systems. We're talking about the music coming on. We're talking about perhaps making the home a little warmer after being a bit cooler all day long. We're talking about security systems perhaps being turned off as you approach the home, and your smartphone pings those systems and lets them know that you are in range.
Absolutely. And it's delightful when it happens, when a home has been configured that way. It's that feeling of being welcomed home. At Lutron, we have a word called pleasance that we love to talk about in terms of residential applications. And it really enhances the pleasance. There's a comment in here, underfloor heating makes the bathroom a welcome space. Absolutely, yes, I completely agree with that. I have it myself. My tiled bathroom floor is always warm in the winter, and that makes me feel good. So yes, I completely agree with that. So when we're thinking about a lighting system, we can think of it as this multiplicity of user interfaces. And then at the other end of it, light sources, and they may be lamps, they may be fixtures. Optical control is very important. We'll come back to that in a little bit. But I just want to explore a couple of expectations that people have for the physical user interface. Going back to the light switch, going back to that keypad on the wall. And I would say that there are 4 keys to user happiness, 4 keys for the homeowner to love what they've got. And I really want them to feel a very positive emotion towards what we put into their rooms. The first of those is they have to like what they look like in the home. And as we've seen from some of the pictures that I put up, and I'm sure you can imagine places you've been, and if you haven't done it before, you'll start spotting them now. Think about those light switches, those keypads. What do they look like? If we can put something into the home that is an interior design work of art, then folks are going to love it. The picture I've put on the screen here is a wonderful brushed metal material, but these could equally be made out of numerous different colors of polymer finish, and you can even get them in glass. I particularly like, we have a black glass keypad. It just looks amazing. And then the buttons displaying what those buttons are going to do. You know, the text on there could be in any language, could be icons, but showing the homeowner, showing the end user what that button is for, means that it's not a confusing thing. So you've got that combination of elegance combined with aesthetic. It should blend into the decor of the room. You're undoubtedly going to be spending a lot of time thinking about the finish of the worktops and the finish of the doors and the finish of the handles on the doors. You can spend an equal amount of attention in getting exactly the right finish of keypads on there as well. So the first thing is the homeowner needs to like the look of them, and it's an interior design element that needs careful consideration. The second out of my 4 keys to user happiness is that they have to expect what happens when they operate them. And that's all about making sure that you don't have unengraved, anonymous buttons on a keypad, but instead you have text that says what's going to happen. People need to expect what happens. You've seen this picture on the screen now for 20 seconds, and you can tell me already how to switch the lights off. Or if I said it's time for the meal to be served, you know exactly which button to press to get the scene, to get that wonderful warm dim lighting that we expect. You haven't had to read a manual, you haven't had to have anybody explain it. It's obvious and it's there. So folks have to expect what's going to happen. They also have to like what happens when they operate them. And this comes back to what we were saying earlier about dimming the lighting, about realizing there's that glorious world between fully on and fully off. And interesting things happen in that world in between. That's where emotion starts happening. There's a question come up here saying, what about customizable text? Absolutely, not just customizable text, but icons, different shapes. Again, perhaps thinking about the homeowners and all of their guests. Maybe not everybody speaks the same language. You might want to use icons instead of words to indicate what should be there. Fourthly, they need to be convenient to use. One of the wonderful things about the keypad that I just showed you on the screen is it's lit up. And the time when you most often want to turn on the lights is when you're in the dark. And the thing that most often prevents you from doing that is not being able to find the light switches. Outside of the home, I spend a lot of time traveling for work. And tomorrow I'm going to be checking into a hotel that I've never been to before. And I have a suspicion, because it's happened many, many times before, that in the dark, in a strange room, I might struggle to find the light switches. If the lights were glowing just very gently in the dark, then I'd be able to find them, and that would be much more convenient. So folks need to like what they look like. They need to expect what they do. They have to like what they do, and they have to be convenient to use. And all of those things are entirely possible. Now, to answer a question that came up earlier, what do you need to make this happen? Well, it entirely depends on the particular keypads that you choose. And with all lighting, there's a certain amount of infrastructure that needs to be thought about. And Cedia, for example, have published many guides and documents to how to plan for wiring in a building. Ed, do you want to comment on that?
Yes, Sam. Cedia.net is the place to go if you're interested in learning more and finding out about some of these white papers that are offered and so on and so forth. And yes, one thing to remember about lighting is when you plan it out, when you map it out, it's got to be right. It's got to be right the first time, and it's important that you have an integrator working carefully with your interior designer and your architect and whoever else is doing the remodel or the new build, to ensure that everything's going to be in the proper place. There are a wide variety of requirements for these various fixtures. And as the voltage drops, things get really interesting. And I think Sam has a formula called Heitz's Law, if I remember correctly, Sam, that kind of dictates exactly what's happening in the lighting universe, if I'm correct.
Absolutely. Heitz's law is all about the increase in luminous efficacy of LEDs. Basically, the idea that LED technology, whilst it's relatively new, is getting better all the time. So it's about the output of light sources getting better. Not so much about infrastructure, but about the optics and as I said, the luminous efficacy. I just like saying luminous efficacy of LED lighting.
It's time for me to get a little plug in here. Cedia.org is the place to go if you want to find an integrator who's in your area. There's a global listing of Cedia certified integrators who can help you out making these decisions as far as smart lighting and these fixtures that Sam has been speaking about as we've been moving along here. And shading as well. Cedia folks can help you out with the integration of shading and lighting into the whole home scenario.
And the good news is it's not immensely complicated. You know, a simple keypad like the one that I've put on the screen here, or in fact the very elegant keypads that I showed earlier, they just need a very straightforward cable. It doesn't look like your regular mains cable. It's low voltage cable, but that's pretty straightforward. Although a lot of people would say, well, whoa, half a second, can't everything go wireless? What about dispensing with the cables entirely? And the good news is, yes, there are lots of wireless lighting controls as well. The ones that I'm showing on the screen right now, they're all wireless controls. We call this the Pico. As I said, it's about the size of my finger in length, and has really easy to operate buttons. And one of the great things about it being wireless, one of the benefits of wireless, is that we can do really cool stuff like having these little pedestals that you can see there. So I could now put my light switch in a place where it's convenient to have, such as on my countertop or on my coffee table, or if we're thinking about bedrooms, it could go on the bedside table. I'm no longer tethered to a wall. I can have lighting controls anywhere. I've got to say, this is a really lovely feature. I haven't had to get out of bed to turn the lights off at the end of the day for years now, because I've got wireless lighting control. So that means once you're snuggled up in bed, there's no discussion about who's going to get out to switch the lights off. Just use a wireless lighting control. And yeah, top tip, wireless controls are wonderful.
We do have a question here, though, about the problem that one might encounter if the wireless connectivity is down for whatever reason, Sam. Where's the backup control should that wireless device fail?
Now, that is a really important and great question. And we need to be a little bit technically savvy in our mind as to whether we're talking about wireless in terms of Wi-Fi and internet and all of that stuff, or whether we're simply talking about a radio protocol. So on the switches that I showed here, they use a radio protocol which is completely independent of your LAN, of your home Wi-Fi. It's independent of your internet connection. We're going to come back to that. So great question. Hold that thought. Of course, these devices are battery powered, being wireless as well. The good news on these is the battery lasts for 10 years and it will give you a warning before it runs out. But something to bear in mind, because there are lots of different vendors. Talk to suppliers about battery life, about the frequency that they're using. Will that frequency clash with other things in the home? And you can make a decision as to the right equipment in order to avoid problems like that. I'm just going to go a little bit nerd for a second and talk about the dimming side of it, because it would take far more time than we've got to go into this in detail. But just to say, in terms of lighting dimming, there's a number of approaches. So at the other end, at the output end, you may have dimmers that live in the walls that are dimming regular incandescent or many types of LED lamp. You might have lamps that are in themselves very clever and can do the dimming within them. You might need to wire inline dimmers that either chop up or switch the mains, the line voltage wiring. Or if you're doing a new installation and you've got a lot of zones of lighting, if you're doing a really big kitchen, then you might deploy something like a panel dimmer where your wiring goes back to that dimmer. And there's all kinds of different control protocols and wiring methods. And the easiest thing, talk to a CEDIA integrator about how to fit these things together in them. On the subject of wireless, though, I'd also like to just go beyond the home and think about the cloud a little bit. Now, the first question there is, what is the cloud? We've probably all heard the term cloud control. The cloud is the idea of using computers that aren't in the home, using servers, using other devices that are not in the home to do controls or to do some extra bit of processing. So in particular, the cloud is really useful for integrating with smart devices. Where we were talking about the geofencing earlier on, that would be an example of cloud control, as would integrating with any of the wonderful AI-based devices that we might find in the home. On the screen here, you possibly recognize the Google Assistant, Josh.ai, Siri, and Alexa. Sorry for any systems that I've just triggered by saying those all out loud. But all of those works with Internet of Things devices. They're all integrated using the cloud. But a key consideration with anything good is also what drawbacks might there be. And so we need to think about reliability. And this answers or addresses one of the questions that came up, which is what happens if I lose my cloud connection, or what happens if I can't get a local Wi-Fi connection? Do I lose control when I'm disconnected from the cloud? And that is a really important really important question to ask. And the answer all hinges on where the processing, where the thinking happens. Does that thinking happen out in the cloud, or is the processing happening within the home? In other words, if I've got a connected light switch and I'm controlling a light, is it having to make a round trip out to a cloud server or not? And my strong suggestion to you is make sure you choose systems where the processing is happening locally and the cloud simply gives you more magic, as it were. The cloud gives you the ability to do extra things, but it's vital that it's not essential for the system to work. Does that make sense?
Makes perfect sense, Sam.
Excellent. Very good. Now, a couple of questions that have come in here. Wireless units, is there a problem with one room or with crossover from one room to another room? Again, it slightly depends on the system, but look for systems where you have unique buttons that are talking to unique dimmers or unique receivers. Most of these devices have a serial number or a MAC address, a unique code built into them. So I could have the wireless light switch that's by my bed. That's just controlling the lighting in that room. And even if I were to bring it into another room, if I bring it into the kitchen, or actually it'll work halfway down the garden, even if I were to take it some distance away, because it's got that unique code, it's not going to control the wrong thing just because it's in a physically different location. Radio doesn't really know about the walls in your home, particularly if they're what do you call it there? We call it plasterboard, drywall, I think.
Drywall, yep.
Yeah. So radio signals will go through drywall. So the Pico doesn't know which room it's in, but the unique code means it's controlling just the right thing. There was another question here about combining low voltage wiring with wireless control. Absolutely, hybrid systems are very common. You can have systems that have a little bit of wireless, perhaps for doing your wireless keypad that sat on the countertop, and then some low voltage wired, gorgeous looking keypads mounted in the wall, and you can tie them together. So yeah, think about lighting controls from the right vendor as being an enormous palette of different choices that you have. I'm just gonna kind of come into land with a little extra vision of what else modern lighting can do to enhance the home. And I want to go multi-dimensional here. I'd like to talk about something called tunable white light. Because the reality is that lighting has evolved. And whilst we may still use candles to light our homes for romantic dinners and such, we've gone through an era of incandescent lighting. We've kind of gone through a slightly difficult time of compact fluorescent lighting. We've landed, and it's happened over here, this side of the Atlantic, perhaps slightly more than in America so far, but we've landed on in the world of solid state lighting. And solid state lighting is just the posh way of saying LED lighting. There's an enormous variety in LED lighting. Some LED lighting is wonderfully dimmable. Some LED lighting can't be dimmed at all, and there's a big challenge with flicker, and that's a whole conversation for another day. But let's look at the high end of LED lighting. And at the high end of LED lighting, we have the ability not only to say how bright it is, so not only to control intensity, but also to control what we call the color temperature. Now, if I was to describe to you that lovely romantic meal that I keep referring to, it would have lovely, warm, low color temperature lighting. We measure this on a Kelvin scale, and the lower the number, the warmer the temperature is. So a really nice warm glow would be 2,500 Kelvin. If I was to describe to you perhaps a corridor in a hospital, it might have rather colder, more bluish, higher color temperature lighting. You might say, well, why would we want to control that? Well, Have a look at these two pictures. The same room lit with the same amount of light, the same intensity, but very different color temperature. On the left, we've got invigorating, colder color temperatures matching the color temperature of the daylight outside. But then in the evening, for a fun gathering, a warmer color temperature light. A question has just come in asking about color temperature versus CRI. Color temperature, CCT, correlated color temperature, is all about how warm or cold the light is. CRI is about color rendering. And the two, whilst they are linked, the two are independent things. And color rendering is about how well a light source illuminates something so that its true colors can be seen. And in the kitchen in particular, if I'm cooking, sorry for any vegetarians on the call today, but if I'm cooking a delicious, gorgeous steak and I want to see the color of that meat so that it looks enticing and delicious, then I'm going to want to have lights with good CRI and in particular good red rendering. So it's another aspect. We don't have time to go into it today, but it's another aspect of lighting to think about. But I want to suggest to you that with LED lighting, you can choose your color temperature, and it adds a second dimension of control to your lighting scheme. And in fact, we can go beyond that, not just thinking about different shades of white, but perhaps adding color, adding accent. And we can really use light to make a space very interesting. So lots of different effects you can think of, as I said, adding color and adding white tones to the space. But in summary, what I'd like to say about lighting in a space is, first of all, hopefully we've expanded your mind to think about it in different ways, but make sure you've got the finest ingredients, the best tools, and enjoy giving people a dynamic space that takes the rooms that you're working in and makes them as useful and flexible as you know they can be.
Sam, we do have a couple of questions here, and this is a softball I'm going to tee up for you. Melanie is asking, where can you purchase gorgeous looking keypads?
That was a nice softball, thank you.
It really was, yeah.
If you go to www.lutron.com, the particularly gorgeous ones that I showed you are our Palladium range of keypads. They're our high-end keypads. As I said, their brand name is Palladium, and they're from Lutron.
This ties into another question. As technology expands, will these control options and panels become more affordable? And I'm pretty sure that most manufacturers have different ranges of these options, right?
Absolutely, yeah. There's always the good, better, best series of choices that can be made. And yeah, I mean, the little radio keypads are remarkably affordable. I'm an engineer. I'm not going to talk about pounds and pence or dollars and cents. But yeah, absolutely. There's good, better, best. Bear in mind, as with all things, you do get what you pay for. Think about questions such as battery life and radio range and reliability and making sure you're not getting clashing frequencies. But yeah, absolutely. At the other end, just one more thing. Please. At the other end of the spectrum, there may be something that you want for an artistic reason. So, for example, you might want, maybe you've got some retired naval admiral whose kitchen you're doing, and they like rope edge brass. And, it's a particular designer keypad you want to put in there, and it's not available in a digital form. It's just a contact closure. Even simple switch contacts can be wired into lighting control systems to facilitate that kind of thing. So I guess my message there is never assume that something can't be done. There's always a way.
We've had this question come up a couple of times over the course of this one, Sam, and didn't get around to it. Is there a motor, an affordable one, that you could add to an existing shade? Have you seen any products like this yet?
The thing I would say is to kind of distance oneself from motors and think about the automation, the motorization, as it were, of the shade as adding a drive. It's more than just a set of cogs and gears to make it go up and down. When you're moving shades up and down, you want them to move silently. You want them also to move very precisely. If I've got architectural features in my window, maybe I've got lines in the window or panes of glass, it would be really nice if my shade could move to a specific midway position and stop. And so there are undoubtedly motor things that you can add to tug existing shades, but you're much better with a shade that has a drive integrated into it, so that you can cause the shade to move to exactly the position that you want, and to do it repeatably, and to do it silently, and do it reliably.
I know you could talk about this particular subject for another half an hour, Sam, but I did want to touch on one thing, and that's the importance of eliminating flicker when you're talking about dimming LED fixtures, because there is a flicker element that you might not even perceive visually, but it might be affecting you negatively. So just touch on that if you don't mind very quickly.
Oh, I would love to. And as you say, I'd love to talk for hours, days about LEDs and how to make them stop flickering. It's one of my pet subjects. The issue is this. We used to connect hot bits of wire to dimmers, and those hot bits of wire didn't really flicker all that much. And the transition from incandescent lamps to LEDs is the transition from hot bits of wire to solid state, to electronic silicon-based devices. And that's just a very different load to put on a dimmer. Now, the good news is there are dimmers that are very good at dimming LED loads. The bad news is there are thousands and thousands of different types of LED load, and there are hundreds and hundreds of different types of dimmer, and you need to test the combination. So it's no good to say this lamp is no good. It's the combination of lamp and dimmer together that need to be verified. And that's a whole big other topic, but the good news is there are answers. It can be done, and there's no need. I saw a question, it's gone off my screen now, but there was a question about lifetime of LED lighting.
Yes.
It doesn't need to be a problem. If you have the right combination of dimmer and LED lamp, then that problem can be solved. It's all to do with things called repetitive inrush currents and leading and trailing edge dimming, or forward and reverse phase as it's known in America. And that's a whole area to delve deeply into. I'll just say that lighting has become a little bit of a science now. It used to be quite straightforward, and now it's a bit of a science. But the good news is it can all be done, and it can be done reliably.
Terrific. We are just about out of time. Sam Woodward is with Lutron, and you can find more about Sam and some of the work he's done for CEDIA at cedia.net. There are two different websites that I'm going to mention here right now. Cedia.net has all the technical information. It's for members, and it's for folks who are interested in joining it, et cetera. And that's where you'll find the white papers and all the technical information and the like. You'll also find the CEDIA podcast there, and Sam's been a regular guest on the podcasts, and those are completely free to download. You can also find them on iTunes and Spotify and wherever else you go and fish for podcasts. But cedia.net is the place to go for the tech stuff. If you are looking to find an integrator in your area, cedia.org is the place to go. It's got a great finder service there where you can find an integrator near you, CEDIA certified, with your zip code, your country location, no matter what. Just plug it in and I'll bring up CEDIA certified integrators that are near you that will know exactly how to install this lighting. Sam, thank you so much for the time.
Thank you very much indeed, Ed, and thank you, Deborah. It's been a great pleasure.
Yes, and I want to add here, thank you all for joining us today. Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Ed, for all this wonderful information, and a shout out to our sponsor, Geberit, today. And thank you all for being here. This has been a fantastic and really interesting presentation, and I hope you all come back for more of great information. Thank you again.
Thank you and farewell.